7:30. That's all of our a cappella vocal groups are all going to be singing. Also, Fraser and Haas is getting ready to do Symposium today. They're right here tomorrow night at 7:30 as well. Saturday, Kelsey Birchfield. Kelsey, are you here? Yeah! Her recitals tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but Saturday at 2 o'clock here in the PAL. Sunday is the big percussion ensemble extraordinaire. Dr. Sanderbeck's coming home. You know, he was a professor here for like 50 years, I don't know. At 3 o'clock in the Grand Hall on Sunday, Cameron Van Dyke's recital is 5 o'clock. Tuesday, Drake Gaddy's recital is here at 7:30. And then, so Thursday is a music day, so it's for auditioning incoming students. You all know what that's like unless you've lived through the COVID issue. So we're going to have some guest students on campus on Thursday, so if you see them, say hello, and, you know, it's nice to meet you and that kind of thing. And then next Friday, we're out of school for Veterans Day, right? All right, so this group that's coming, I'm going to read their bio real quick. The musical partnership between consummate performer Alistair Fraser, the Michael Jordan of Scottish fiddling, and brilliant Californian cellist Natalie Haas spans the full spectrum between intimate chamber music and ecstatic dance energy. Over the last 20 years of creating a buzz at festivals and concert halls across the world, they have truly set the standard for fiddle and cello in traditional music. They continue to thrill audiences internationally with their virtuosic playing, their near telepathic understanding, and the joyful spontaneity and sheer physical presence of their music. Fraser has a concert and recording career spanning over 30 years with a long list of awards, accolades, radio and television credits, and feature performances on top movie soundtracks like Last of the Mohicans and Titanic. In 2011, he was inducted into the Scottish Traditional Music Hall of Fame. Haas is a graduate of Juilliard School of Music, is one of the most sought-after cellists in traditional music today. She has performed and recorded with a who's who of the fiddle world, including Mark O'Connor, Natalie McMaster, Irish supergroups, soloists in Alton, Liz Carroll, Dirk Powell, Brittany Haas, Daryl Anger, Jeremy Kittle, Hanneke, I'm sorry I'm butchering these words, but they're Scottish names, I'm sorry. Hanneke Castle, Laura Cortez, and many more. The seemingly unlikely pairing of fiddle and cello is the fulfillment of a long-standing musical dream for Fraser. His search eventually led him to find a cellist who could help return the cello to its historical role as a rhythmic heart of Scottish dance music, where it stood for hundreds of years before being regulated to the orchestra. His duo's debut recording, Fire and Grace, won the coveted The Scots Trad Music Album of the Year Award, which is the Scottish equivalent of a Grammy. Since its release, the two have gone on to record 5 more critically acclaimed albums that blend a profound understanding of the Scottish tradition with cutting-edge string explorations. In addition to performing, they both have motivated generations of string players through their teaching at fiddle camps across the globe. And I was here for sound check. They are wonderful. So, without further ado, Alistair Fraser and Natalie Haas.
Wow, this is exciting. We love sharing our journey. Man, it's actually kind of daunting when you hear your whole life history kind of delivered before you come on stage. But here we are, back in Johnson City, and we have a short time to welcome you into our world. And man, we love our world, the world of the fiddle and the cello. And I know I have said this often, but I think it bears repeating when I say that people see our small ensemble, our wee band. By the way, I'm from Scotland. And you think, well, that's really cute. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, they think, did they lose half of their string quartet? What's going on? and I've taken great delight. We've been playing together for something like 23 years. I've taken great delight almost every night in the last 23 years saying that this, a fiddle and a cello, was the dance band of choice in Scotland for centuries, going back to the 18th century. All the fancy balls, the after parties, the dances in village halls, fiddle and cello ruled the day. It's amazing. And eyewitness accounts of people having to leave the ballroom because they couldn't contain themselves from the excitement. And Natalie and I have been journeying into that world, but also saying, what now? So it's a continuum. Our music is what I like to say, vernacular. I know you guys I think you're all string players. Is that right? No. Oh, excuse me. Wow, major faux pas there. So we have a whole assortment. Anyway, you're expressing your soul on your instrument. You're asking questions and you're celebrating the great repertoire. And in our world, we both trained, you might say, classically. But when I would play my fiddle at home, I'd go play Mozart during the day, and then at night I'd go home and play old songs with my family and play dance tunes. So we're going to bring you into our vernacular world where you take your instrument and you actually make it speak in the vernacular. And I'm going to mention this idea right up front, the idea of multilingual music making. I'm not sure if people think about that or use that concept often, but it's a really useful concept because you can ask yourself the question, how many languages do I play my instrument in, whatever it is? And in our world, the violin or the fiddle, it's really useful to be multilingual. And if I bring you into our Scottish world, I have to decide, am I going to play my instrument in modern 20th century technique? Or am I going to play my instrument in Gaelic? And as we go through this, we're going to take you around some of the fiddleistic, linguistic influences as we play tunes from different regions in Scotland. And if you can imagine behind us a map of Scotland, I'm sure you have one in your mind. And then off to that side, you'd have Ireland. 15 miles from Scotland at the closest point is Ireland. Ireland and the west coast of Scotland share a common language, which is called Gaelic, or in Ireland they call it Gaelic. And it's really useful to think about how the languages reflect the way people play their instruments. So come with us now and we'll take you on a wee journey across the land as we go from the west of Scotland into sort of mainland Scotland, if you like, and we'll go jumping around to different regions. So we start in the Gaeltacht, which would be called the name for the Gaelic-speaking part of Scotland, on the west, where all the islands are, Skye and Lewis and Stornoway and all these beautiful places. So here's a Gaelic air from the Outer Hebrides, and then we'll just kind of play you're going to hear words like strathspey, which is a unique dance form in Scotland. We love to dance. A lot of these tunes are connected to dances. So we're going to play a tune called Eilenbeck Donahoin, which is the little brown island in the sea in Gaelic. And then a tune called Bray Lochiel, which is the Braes, the hills of Lochiel, who was a clan chief. And then we'll check in again in a minute.
Maybe before we play, I just want to say something. You know, I know you guys are all probably classical majors, right? We're coming, no, not necessarily. Are there other genres here in the music department? Jazz? Contemporary, bluegrass. I know you have a wonderful old time and bluegrass program here at ETSU, and that is pretty unique. I mean, it's something to be proud of and something, you know, unique to this region. So We're here actually because my sister last year, Brittany Hawes, was artist in residence in the Old Time and Bluegrass department, and we visited them in April, and I met my old friend Esther Park. I don't know if anybody here studies with her. We were in the same year together at Juilliard, and Esther came to hear us do a symposium like this for the old time and bluegrass music students, and she said, we got to get you guys into the music department. And it's so crazy that it's called the music department. Old time and bluegrass are music too. It's so weird that it's, I mean, I understand why, and it's obviously, yeah, part of the Appalachian Studies program, and that is something to be celebrated too. But it's all just music, folks. and this traditional music, which is what we love, although we both grew up in the classical world, as Alistair said, they're very close. I mean, and these instruments are basically just tools to use in whatever style you like. So we both have grown up kind of learning to play the classics, and then branched out into, for Alistair, the music of his own country. For me, kind of an adopted love of Scottish music. But I just wanted to let you know that, that these, there didn't used to be such a separation between the classical music world and the folk music world. In fact, many of the musicians we're going to talk about in the next little while did both. And they were contemporaries of people like Sarasate, and they would have been playing concerts and playing dances the next night, so they're very closely connected, or they used to be anyway, and we want to kind of get back to that and break down some of these barriers that are kind of artificially put up between these worlds that are not that far apart, really. So, as Alistair said, we're going to take you around Scotland, a little tour of these regional dialects. As much as you want to get into this stuff, traditional music, you can get really nerdy and really specific, kind of focusing in on different regions and what make them unique, and how did they grow up to be that way, and how are they connected. But yeah, we want to do a little deep dive into Scottish music and what makes it tick, give you a little taste of our world. So we're going to start in the Highlands and this Gaelic influenced music. They're tunes that are quite short, actually. They're little nuggets, just an A and a B part, but they pack a big punch. Beautiful melodies.
One of the things I'm going to mention is, because you get into the nitty-gritty of it, is how do you enter a note, and how do you spend time there, and how do you leave it? So you get into things like ornamentation, how do you express language, how do you develop a palette, those kinds of areas. So here we go, to Gaelic Scotland for a beautiful Gaelic air. strathspey. Then we have lots of reels that were designed for dancing, pipes, bagpipe influence, grace notes. Bagpipey grace notes all over the place. So here's a tune, a current favorite that we love to play. It's called Donald in the Pig Pen. So you can see there's some pretty good energy there. It's dance energy. Man, it makes people do things they'd never thought they would do that night. Stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning, yahoo. It's fun to play. Now we leave the Highlands, we go into the mainland. We're heading across this way, heading east, and we get to Perthshire, where there was a great fiddle player in the 18th century by the name of Neil Gow, who was the doyen of Scottish fiddle players. He loved to play for dances. He also loved to express his soul, of course, and he wrote beautiful airs. One of the great classic laments was written by Neil Gow, but here's a strathspey, just a classic Neil Gow kind of tune from 18th century Perthshire. Cello there, they used to call it the bowed bass. It's the classic kind of baroque bowed bass. And have you made a comment on
Yes, I would just like to say that I'm making up my parts, just in case that wasn't obvious. We sort of talked about kind of general tunes that we might want to cover, but I don't necessarily have set parts for them. The melodies are pretty set, you know. If there is improv in this style, it's in kind of the the melody players' nuances that they choose to add, the ornaments, the bowings, maybe slight micro variations to the melody. But a lot of where the fun is and the creativity is in the accompaniment part, and so I'm making it up. However, you can go back, and if you're looking especially into this older period, the 18th century, which was kind of the golden age of the fiddle and cello. And Scotland's actually quite unique in many European countries as having a traditional cello be part of the history there. So you can actually go and read bass lines that were intended to be played because they had an amazing printing business as well, very well documented. You know, might not have been exactly what the cello players of the day would be playing because they wouldn't be reading it. But yeah, mostly just kind of what we would call a vamp, where you're just playing basically continuous quarter notes for rhythm, just to keep a steady beat, and then kind of giving some kind of harmonic context for the tunes. So that's kind of where it comes from, that 18th century treatment. But I've chosen to kind of augment that with all of the possibilities that we have with these instruments today. Since the invention of the end pin, that was a game changer because it allowed cellists to get out of first position, so which made a lot more things possible. So I like to play melodies on this as well, and all sorts of rhythmic stuff that gets a lot more complicated than just the the repeated quarter notes like that. But that's what you would have heard, something like that in the 18th century.
As you will hear, I think. So Neil Gow, there he was, playing for dances in Perthshire. Highland Neil, Robert Burns, the poet, met him, and they jammed together, probably had a wee whiskey together. And then Neil Gow had this a son who went to Edinburgh. He went to the big city. And this, I love this because this is where we bring together the vernacular and then the big city. Because he goes to Edinburgh and he meets Italians who've come over from the continent, as we say, from France, from Italy, new ideas, and it's all mixing together in the city. And that includes violinistic ideas, Baroque ideas, influences from the continent. So Neil Gow's son was called Nathaniel Gow. He went to Edinburgh and was the cellist in the orchestra. Then he was the first violinist. Then he ended up conducting the Assembly Rooms Orchestra in Edinburgh for all the high society events. I would love to have met Nathaniel Gow. I think he was a real fantastic musician, but also had a broad spectrum. And he would write and play tunes like this one. This is Lady Charlotte. No, this is Miss Hannah of Elgin, which is a jig. But you can hear kind of a more polite Baroque kind of influence coming in at this point. We've kind of left some of the wild heather and haggis behind in Perthshire there, and he comes to the big city, and you hear this kind of sound.
Well, I just want to make a note also that in the naming of these tunes, a lot of them are named after members of the aristocracy who would have been the patrons of the musicians back in the day. So a lot, if you go through these old tune books, you'll find a lot of names like that. Miss Hannah of Elgin, Lady Anne Hope of Pinkie, the Marquess of Huntly, all sorts of members of the aristocracy who were patrons of the arts.
Dancing in Edinburgh, wearing fancy ball gowns, they're wearing soft shoes. The nature of the dance was different. They're off the floor. They're looking for height and flight, which affects the fiddler's bow arm. When you're playing for a dance and people are getting down, they're going into the floor. It's a contra dance, a square dance. You want to be bowing in a certain way. If you've got a bunch of people dressed up in ball gowns with soft shoes on who are actually leaving the floor, different bowing completely. It's so fun. So then let's leave Edinburgh for a minute. Oh, but no, a quick mention of another dance that was popular in the 18th century, and this really takes us into the heart of that world, I think. These are minuets. When people used to dance the minuet, and you'd have tunes like this. Of melody, and we know thousands of them. It's great. And then we go up to northeast Scotland.
I just want to mention before you do that, though, that was one that was used in a song by Robert Burns, who's the great bard and poet. If you're not familiar with him, he's the guy who wrote Auld Lang Syne and many other things that you may or may not be aware of. But yeah, that bass line actually was one that's ripped off from one of the actual collections, just because we loved it so much. There's some real gems out there. I was going to say something else, I forgot.
Well, we'll continue this theme, and we'll go up to northeast Scotland, up there somewhere on my map behind me. And we'll meet a gentleman by the name of William Marshall, who was a great composer, one of the best makers up of tunes, fine fiddler. And one of the unique things about the Scottish fiddle tradition is we have so many tunes in the flat keys. It's quite unusual. And of course, it makes your instrument sound different, kind of golden, warmer in a different way. So, as Natalie mentioned, he would write tunes for the aristocracy. Because if you called a tune after a member of the aristocracy, chances are they'd want to donate to getting a copy of it, or to donate to your book, or hire you. So he wrote this tune, one of my favorites, I think I can say one of our favorites. It's called The Duchess of Bedford's Slow Strathspey. And this is where you take a dance tune and you kind of open it up and look inside. So you're no longer thinking about moving bodies around on the dance floor. You're thinking, how do I celebrate the essences of this kind of tune? And you take time over it, and you use rubato, and you kind of look inside and find the beautiful elements inside. So here we go to there were many worlds of William Marshall, but this is one of his tunes, The Duchess of Bedford's Slow Strathspey.
So Strathspey, actually, I don't think Alistair mentioned this yet, is a dance form that's unique to Scotland. And that's kind of rare, actually, because a lot of the dances that get played there, I mean, and some of them you'll know from, if you played Bach, he wrote jigs, which came from Ireland originally. Reels and jigs kind of are our most common dance forms, both in Ireland and Scotland. And then you get a lot of these dances that came up from the continent, like the minuet. But then the Strathspey, miraculously, somehow, this origins are kind of a mystery, but came from Scotland. And the way you know you're in a Strathspey is this very distinctive rhythm called the Scotch snap. And basically, it's like a real, is a 4/4 time kind of even beats. And the Strathspey is dotted, and that's what differentiates it. So can you show us a quick Scotch snap so you can recognize one next time you hear one?
Isn't that great? We got to put our name on a really big figure. Harum, harum, harum. If you hear that, actually, to be more accurate, if you're in a Strathspey, if you get harum dara, like a 16th, dotted 8th, dotted 8th, 16th, that rhythmic figure, chances are you're in a Strathspey. Look out. So you get harum dara. So it sounds like this. That kind of thing.
Okay, and so if we stay in that northeast region, There's another fiddle player, I mentioned Sarasate earlier, who was a contemporary of this guy. And actually this guy, his name's James Scott Skinner, the self-proclaimed Strathspey King. And he began his life as a cellist. And he was, I think he died in 1927. So this is, you know, cello was still part of the tradition, the dance music there up through the early 1900s. And then it kind of got stamped out a little bit when louder instruments came along, like the piano, and cello kind of stopped being associated with traditional music as much until the last 20 or 30 years. It's made a comeback.
Skinner was amazing because he, as Natalie says, he began his life playing the cello for dances with his teacher, his violin string teacher, and they would walk to dances 10 miles, 20 miles, so they say, with a cello and a fiddle and a cloth sack slung over their shoulder. And then they'd play for a dance and walk home, or wherever they were going. He then went from being a cellist to an amazing fiddle player, violinist, became a friend of Sarasate, the great Spanish violinist, and used to play a typical concert of Scottish Strathspeys and Reels, and then he'd throw in a couple of Paganini caprices and some Sarasate pieces. So he was what begins to be sort of what we think of as the modern hybrid, where you're fluent in the vernacular, but you're also fluent in the great classic repertoire. So Skinner's kind of emerges as one of the first people with that kind of range violinistically. So here's a couple of tunes he would have played.
I had just absolutely no idea what he was going to play there, just so you know.
We're just jamming here. I always want to just say, let's clear the chairs and have a dance. But it is fun to go deep into these different styles. And now we're heading, as you've realized, we went from the west, we went to central Scotland, we went down to Edinburgh, we visited the Baroque-influenced people. And then we moved up to the northeast, and we got into the northeast vernacular with players like Skinner. If you keep going north in Scotland, where do you end up? Any suggestions? Ireland's to the west. If you go north in Scotland, right to the tip of the Scottish mainland, and you get yourself on a boat, and you travel for 10 hours on this boat, if you're lucky, you'll end up on the Shetland Islands, which is almost getting halfway to Norway, still in Scotland. So when people ask us, what is Scottish music? I hope you're getting a sense of the whole spectrum, that range. It goes from Baroque-influenced Edinburgh, 18th century, to Highland Gaelic-influenced, closer to Ireland.
Bagpipes.
Pipes. To, now we've made it all the way to the north, up to Shetland, where you can almost wink over to Norway, and you can hear Scandinavian influences in the fiddle styles and in the speech patterns. So let's go to Shetland.
Yeah, all of these regions have their own dialect, and it's absolutely reflected in the music. And in fact, Shetland changed hands many times between the Norwegians and the Scots. I think it was given as a dowry back to Scotland at one point. But yeah, and actually you'll hear hopefully in what we're about to play, not only the Scandinavian influence, but a little bit of American old time as well, in the way that they bow there. They use this thing called the shuffle bow, which also is a big feature in old time music as well.
There's a kind of a feature to this first tune we're going to play. It's called the Full Rigged Ship, and then the tune after that is the New Rigged Ship. The Full Rigged Ship is tends to be played in a sort of a rubato kind of way, and the objective is to make you feel like you're on board this great, enormous ship, and the seas are pretty rough, and it's sort of giving you that feeling that, it's not quite stable, and it's kind of fun, but it's like, man, you're on a journey, you're on an adventure. And then the second tune is much more of a real dance tune again. You know, I just wish we had longer, because I would love to spend more time in each one of these, and especially some of the soul music. We're kind of glossing over it here. I'm sure you know that, but some of the gorgeous airs, some of the classic 18th century. It's substantial. It's musically wonderful food, and especially when you arrange it as we do, very, very satisfying to play. But looking at the history of all of this, you know, you go deeply into anything and you find more and more questions. And as I've examined my own tradition, I realized that I had to fight for my tradition. I had to fight for my ornaments, fight for my grace notes. There are always efforts to suppress people's expression. And I don't know if you're interested in this topic or not, but in Scotland we've had to fight to keep the vernacular in our music and not be standardized. One has to resist the efforts to put things in boxes and standardize them. And you hear like expressions like, can you play that properly? As soon as I hear the word properly, I head for the door. Because we have to play in our native way, because that's where the really good food is. And sometimes you have to leave the country in order to find some of the older ways of playing, certainly in my music. So I can learn old ways of playing Scottish music by coming to Appalachia, listen to old-time fiddle players. I can hear some of the influences that we lost back home. Another huge area that is so important for learning how the tunes can be or can be expressed is to go to Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. Cape Breton Island is a place where people just live, eat, and stay up for the fiddle. They dance every night of the week to the fiddle. They're fluent. You hear people in grocery stores wandering around doing their shopping, whistling fiddle tunes. They love it, and they're playing old Scottish music. And they dance, as I say. So here's just a reel, a couple of reels from Cape Breton Island. The main thing to notice here is that the groove is different. And I want to mention that word groove because we all have to be, as musicians, we have to be groove aware. And often it gets lost. One of the most fascinating things when you're arranging music is, what kind of groove are you going to set up? What's the rhythmic momentum looking like, as well as the harmonic motion? What's the rhythmic motion going on underneath the tune? And in Cape Breton, you tend to get kind of it's more of a boogie-woogie groove that you get going on.
It's hard to illustrate on the cello, actually, because the accompaniment instrument of choice there is the piano. When the Scottish migrants came over in the 18th century, they got kicked out of Scotland because their land was getting taken over for sheep farming by the British. So a lot of them ended up in Cape Breton, and they didn't bring their cellos with them, probably because they were too big to carry on the boat. But anyway, I think they started using pump organs kind of in the beginning, in the early days, and then later kind of gravitated towards the piano. So I can tell you what would be going on in the piano in a Cape Breton groove, which is not that far gone from the kind of 18th century vamp bowed bass lines that you were hearing earlier. There's kind of more chromatic movement in it. In the left hand of the piano, they're doing a lot of kind of just like playing continuous quarter notes, like I was saying in the bass lines before, but alternating octaves and using kind of more chromatic passing tones. And then the real syncopated, the boogie woogie kind of stuff comes in the right hand. So you're like, so like, yeah, very syncopated right hand, and left hand is just kind of holding down a groove. So I'll do my best to show what that sounds like on a different instrument.
Thanks. We're going to chat about some things, but as you could probably see, I was just getting on the edge of getting really excited there. And as you become a dance musician, and I want to just mention this today, because as we travel around and we observe the evolution of music in our lifetime, I worry about dance a wee bit. I worry if enough people are playing for dances, because so much of what goes into the technique that we use on violin, cello, even big band music, brass sections, so much of that came from being dance aware, which means signing into the groove, keeping the energy up. The fiddler's bow arm, the violinist's bow arm, you might be playing a saraband or a gigue or a gavotte, all dance forms. And very often nowadays we have dance forms being played by people who've never played for a dance, which is actually kind of bizarre. Because if you haven't played for a dance, you don't know what it feels like to actually move bodies around on the floor with your bow arm or with your breath on your wind instrument. It's huge, it's life-changing, and it provides so much energy. So I just want to put that out there. When we kind of latch onto the dance energy, I love that feeling of becoming sort of an energizer, you know. And the beautiful thing is you get this resonance between the musicians and the dance floor, and it's a feedback loop. So man, you can play for hours and not get tired. You just want to keep playing. It's an amazing feedback loop. And compare that to just kind of playing in a room where nobody's moving. Sometimes, and there are times, obviously, for that. But I just want to maybe toss that in there if people have thoughts about that. How do we get dance back in this system? Not just to dance, but to actually educate our instrument playing. Yes. Natalie.
Yeah, well, I think that sort of concludes the little regional tour we wanted to give you of Scotland. Hopefully you can tell how passionate we are about this stuff. I want to give you a little bit of background on both of us, too, just so you kind of know, get to know us a little better and where we're coming from with this music. I guess I'll start, since I have the microphone. I met Alistair at his fiddle camp, Valley of the Moon Scottish Fiddle School in California, which is where I grew up. And Alistair's been living there, even though he's from Scotland, has been based in California for 40 years or something like that now, and has been running this fiddle camp for most of them. And that's how both my sister and I discovered traditional music, just kind of wandering in to this week-long summer camp, kind of not knowing what it was we were getting into. Having both kind of come from the Suzuki program, I had played for a couple years when I went to the fiddle camp for the first time. And then my world was just completely blown open by finding this, not only the music itself, but also the music, the community surrounding it, because that's a really big part of folk music. It's music for the people, for dancing, for gathering people together, and for kind of celebrating the whole spectrum of human emotion. You know, it can take you there, even though on the surface it may sound simple. But it really does kind of cover all of the human emotional spectrum, and the community itself is around it is amazing. You know, people jamming into all hours of the night, coming from all walks of life, all ages, meeting together under the redwoods, which is where the camp is in California, and kind of finding a common interest and sharing a love. And then using that as a vehicle for socializing, and that's the case, I think, with a lot of traditional music. So yeah, I discovered that world, and there were not that many fiddle camps in the country at that point in time. I started going in the kind of mid '90s, and my sister was 8 and I was 11, and it was an unusual camp in that they offered a cello class at a fiddle camp, and that was because Alistair came from this tradition that had cello as an important integral part of its historical dance tradition. A couple years into the camp, going in every summertime, I was still doing classical lessons in Suzuki throughout the school year, doing youth symphony and all of that, chamber music groups, and then I would meet my friends when I came back to the camp every summer, just for 1 week a year, but that would give me like enough fuel to keep me going for the rest of the year. And I love classical music as well, and continued to play it. When it came time kind of to decide what I wanted to do, obviously my parents wanted me to go to college, and I never really found an academic subject that grabbed me the way that music did. So I knew I wanted to go to music school, and there wasn't really a program like you have here for old time and bluegrass for Celtic music. That didn't exist, and still doesn't exist in this country anyway. So I decided to go the classical route for school, and went to Juilliard, did my undergrad there, and I kept these two worlds kind of very separate. When I was in school, I was doing my classical degree. I had a teacher who was very understanding and kind of knew what I did on the side and supported it, and that wasn't always the case. I had a few teachers in high school who didn't get it, but when I got to college, I was kind of doing the classical stuff while I was in school, and Alistair and I were already touring together. We started playing gigs together when I was 16, and so I was touring kind of through my whole college years. Started also playing with Mark O'Connor at that time in his Appalachia Waltz trio. So I was actually missing a lot of school. I visited the dean's office a lot for professional leave. I kept doing the fiddle stuff when we would play together, and I also was kind of going to Irish sessions in New York, because that's kind of what they had to offer. It's very hard to find Scottish sessions in this country, but Irish sessions are everywhere. So, and New York in particular has a great session scene. So I kind of did both. I wasn't very open with my Juilliard colleagues about the other stuff I was doing, because I wasn't sure kind of what kind of reception I would get. And then when I finished school, I got my bachelor's degree, and I decided it was just too much of struggle to balance the touring life with being in school. And I know a lot of my peers were going on to get masters and doctorates, and I just decided to stop doing school at that point and just be on the road. And that's kind of been the case ever since. We've been playing together. We've made like 7 albums together at this point, I think, now. What we just played for you, we were kind of taking you back through the centuries just so you can kind of know where this music has come from. But it is actually a living tradition, and there's new music getting written all the time, and we also compose. The two of us love to write as well and arrange as well as play the old stuff. So that's kind of where we're at now in our journey. We just released an album that's all original material, and we're kind of trying to get out of the mold of traditional tunes. The sort of expected thing is that the fiddle is the melody instrument and the cello is the accompaniment instrument, and you play each tune a couple times and then you play another one, and you can string medleys together like that, but there's not a lot of arrangement, so we're getting into more compositional stuff where we're trying to break out of that mold and create more kind of long form pieces, still with a heavy traditional influence, but that's kind of where we're at now. And the cello, as I said, like it's been, in that bass role a lot, but most of my journey has been kind of trying to push the cello out of that role and expand the possibilities of what it can do. So I had Alistair was a big mentor for me. I also had a great mentor in Daryl Anger, who is like one of the pioneers of the non-classical string world right now, and he has been for the last 30 years or so. He's the guy who invented the chop technique, this sound, which is very percussive and great for creating rhythmic feels that kind of provide a nice bed for tunes that are rhythmic in nature to sit on top of. So yeah, kind of incorporating some of these more modern techniques and playing with the roles of the two instruments is what I like to do. Alistair, would you like to tell us a little bit about where you've been? And then we'll
Might
open it
take
up
too
to
long.
questions.
I'm also open to just opening up the floor now. You know, we've kind of set the table for the feast that we love. Maybe we could play one of our more modern pieces, but I'm curious to know what's your mindset right now? Has anyone got anything they want to contribute? Let's jump in and make this a two-way thing.
Yes, so you've talked about the way that you interact with your dancers in the audience and choose music. It seems that you have a very open ear and a very open heart, and I'm just wondering, what are you listening to? Not just music-wise, but what are you listening to?
Not just music-wise. Oh, man. Well, I could just shoot from the hip. Right now, I'm listening to what's the name? Oh, Wolfpack. I get a kick out of these guys because what you just said of me, I would say of them. I love it when you have a band that comes along that is just kind of, they're not quite fit in any mold. It's a bunch of guys getting together and saying, how can we ask questions and be relevant and have fun doing it? I think it's really important to have the energy that comes from having fun with your bandmates, your ensemble, because then you can soar to great heights. You know, the creativity is sparking much more efficiently when you're in an ensemble where people are having fun, you know, and they're testing boundaries and just. So I'm getting a kick out of these guys right now. I mean, there's classic old things that when actually, if I can speak for both of us, when we're on the road, which we are often, we will often tune on into satellite radio and listen to 1940s big band stuff because the arrangements are tremendous and it's fun-loving and it's groove-aware and it's dance-aware. I mean, plus I'm an absolute classical music addict, you know, from Bruckner's Sixth to everything else. I mean, I love the repertoire. I love the great violin concertos. I devour them. I compare different fiddle players playing and listen to the phrasing and you know, it's a big range. Yeah, I guess I don't listen a lot to fiddle music. But it's just part of me, you know. I grew up in that, and we're surrounded by it. But I hope that begins to answer your question. Fun-loving, playful, deep. You know what I really love? And then I'll just stop here. If I can hear musicians playing, no matter what the genre is, if I hear that they have fluency in what they're doing, I can bask in it. And it could be playing Mozart, or it could be Stefan Grappelli playing. I just go, wow, there's someone that is just absolutely soaring on a frictionless plateau. They're in the zone. And whoa, what a privilege to hear someone doing that. So I seek out that kind of performance, no matter what the genre.
I think I saw another hand up over here. Yes.
Which Highland Games? Yes, many times.
And Ed Miller. Yes.
And Ed Miller, yes, many times. You
Wow.
have? Cool.
Amazing.
Wow, I can't believe we haven't met. Maybe we have met.
Small world.
Yeah. We know that whole world very well. Yeah. Cheers. Yeah.
Yeah.
With this whole awesome Celtic and old roots thing in mind, there is a Celtic band here,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not made aware of it until like a month ago. And I'm a percussionist, but I'm going to sign up for guitar lessons because the guy giving guitar lessons here toured with the Chieftains for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, is that Will? Jane's son? I, yes. Yeah, he's great.
And if I could study with him for a while and be able to do something different, I feel like as an educator, I can provide more. So right now it only has 3 people. If anyone is even relatively interested in doing anything beyond like just ink on a page and using your ear for a bit, that would be awesome.
And I would say you don't have to play a traditional instrument to be in a band like that. I mean, the case in point, although cello does have a role in Scottish music, you can make any instrument work for any genre if you get fluency, as Alistair said. So yeah, and there's amazing percussion in Celtic music too. Boron, hand drum, yeah, if you ever wanted to try that.
I would just like to enlarge the net also, just in passing here, because yes, we're coming from the Scottish point of view here, but do you know what? It's a big world out there. We love Galician music. We love Moorish-influenced grooves, Middle Eastern grooves. We love African music. Like, we go to Spain a lot. We hang out with the Asturians and the Catalonians, and we have the same conversation. It's amazing, this rich world out there of people celebrating their culture. And it gets into the classical genre. There are people making beautiful new statements. So the feast is incredible. Yes, someone had a hand up, yeah.
Yeah,
So I sing in the Celtic band here.
amazing.
And at the moment, what we're trying to figure out is how to kind of get our name more out there, because a lot of people are like, wait, you two sing in the Celtic band? So I was thinking, Celtic definitely fits with the music department as well as with the old time music. So what are some advice you would offer for us to advertise and get our name out there besides just performing?
Favorite authors, did you say?
No, I have to get out there.
Uh-huh.
I think performing is a great one, like in a place where you are visible, like the student center, where people are. There's a steady stream of traffic of people.
What song do you like to sing?
Oh my gosh, When the Chicks Tomorrow,
Cool. Yeah.
Put up flyers, around campus, not just in the music building and the old time and roots department, but.
Start a jam in the lobby every day.
That's what I did when I was at Juilliard, because I wanted to get other people into it. I started a sort of a surreptitious jam session, and I would leave the door open so whoever walked by and listened in could just poke their head in and see what was going on.
I think Natalie, she can correct me, but I think she wrote an article in the Juilliard newsletter entitled, "Why Don't the Cellists Get to Groove?"
That wasn't the exact title, but yeah, something like that.
So what else is going on in our minds? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, I know you talk about how important dance is to Scottish. I noticed that whenever you were tapping your foot, you kind of did your own thing. Is there more specific dances to these different tunes for
Absolutely.
Yeah, the dance world is...
Can you show it?
Yeah. Yeah, if we had long enough, yeah. Game on. Yeah. No, hang on a minute. Yeah, maybe we can go there. But yeah, the dance is I would just say, when you're playing if people are going in circles, you want to play in a rotational way. You want to encourage rotational energy. If they're going close to the floor, you want to make them there's more of an emphasis on the strong beats. If you want them to leave the floor, you got to have more offbeat thing going on. It's amazing how that translates to your instrument. And it's a rich world. And yes, often we have entire audiences dancing.
I will say there's kind of two main streams in dance in traditional music. You have the social dance, which is for couples and often has beautiful figures like throughout the floor, and maybe not steps that are not that complicated so that anybody can join in, but it's very much about the social aspect. But then there's also like a solo tradition, especially in Cape Breton, which probably came from Scotland originally, but kind of got lost there, of step dancing, which is like all about the percussive kind of showing off your steps, and that's for a solo dancer. Within each of these regions and each of these tune types, there's like many ways of dancing them. Just as much nuance in the dance as there is in the music.
You've talked about how you would kind of hide when you're at Juilliard and separate. Have you ever, I guess for both of you, have you ever received backlash from like classical elitists, and how have you like dealt with that?
Great question, loaded question. You want to answer this first?
No, you.
Well, yeah, I had a teacher who's a very well-known teacher when I was in high school, and she ended up firing me because she could not get her head around the fact that I was into this other style. I think she felt threatened, actually, and was worried about what it would do to my technique. And to be fair, yeah, I do have a really weird bow hold now, but it works for me. And I think we get classical teachers, especially from certain schools, have these blinders on. Their way is the only way. But from what I've experienced, technique is meant to be adaptable to each person's needs and physique, and and as long as you're not hurting yourself, I think good technique is kind of a myth. Yeah, so that there was no solution there. She fired me, and I found another teacher who was more accepting, and that was the end of it. And then in terms of getting backlash, I was in the conservatory department. I think actually the most, whenever somebody found out I was doing this other thing, they were usually really into it. Mostly the students. The teachers were a little harder to win over, and they weren't thrilled about the fact that I was missing classes to go perform. But I think this is all changing, hopefully. I think the conservatory world is a little slower to change than the rest of the world, which is sad. But I don't know the solution. Just do you, and don't be ashamed of it.
I think we could give you lots of stories, maybe later. But it's better to stay on the upward spiral, as Natalie says, and it's getting better. The worlds are starting to speak to each other. And what great bounty is there? Because, man, can we learn from each other? I remember doing an audition with a kind of a known Bach teacher in London at the music school there, and I just brazenly went in and I offered to play some Bach, but I did it as, just shooting straight from my vernacular bow arm, and I played. And I played the Bach jig, and he said, "Where did you learn that?" And I said, "Well, I just made it up myself. The bowing is all mine because I played for a lot of time." He says, "Very interesting bowing you're using. Where did you learn that?" I go, "Well, I didn't learn it anywhere. It's just what I do." And he took me on as a student, and it was wonderful because I brought that dance energy into the jig, and we had a fantastic relationship. So he was open to it. I saw some hands up here. Yeah.
So I'm from Tunisia, North Africa, and in Tunisia we have also the music is more based on oral tradition.
Yeah.
Improvisation is a big part of that too. And I feel like I play the piano. I'm a piano student here. I feel like whenever I started to play the piano and whenever I started to get classic music, the more I get cut away from that, from the improvisation, and I feel like now, like these recent years, I've got more and more interested in it again, and I feel like because I feel like more people dedicate improvisation from the jazz, then it's nice and simple.
I think I wish we had longer. These are all such great questions, man. We should stay up all night and talk about them. But this is a big one. First of all, not everyone wants to improvise. People are scared to improvise, but improvise is very close to composition. Only it's the same thing. Only
On the
I think it's good to encourage people to stretch the boundaries. And I remember having a student one time where she wanted to improvise. She not only wanted to improvise, she just wanted to play by ear, without written music. And she was in tears, and she said, I cannot play by ear. I can't make anything up. I can't do. And I would say, well, just play a note, play any note. I can't. And she would freeze. And this happens all the time. People freeze, and they feel debilitated, and they get stuck. And when we were on a beautiful, in the Isle of Skye, actually, in a nice room, and there was a big picture window, and there were mountains outside. And there she was, frozen to the spot, close to tears, because she couldn't make anything up. She couldn't even play a note. She was a good instrumentalist. I said, look out the window. You see that mountain range? See how it rises and falls from left to right as you follow it along as it goes to the north? I said, play me that mountain range. Start at that end and just play it. And she did. She just made up the mountain range on her instrument and then broke down in a complete sobbing fit of tears because she had conquered this idea that she couldn't just make anything up. She had done it. So I guess everyone has a little key, but there's a lot of fear around getting off the page in general.
I have a couple thoughts. I think the way to conquer that fear is like a really fundamental change, actually, in music teaching in general, and starting from a really young age. Because I feel like I have this bilingual thing because I started going to this fiddle camp when I was a kid, so I didn't have the same inhibitions that a lot of adults have about getting off the page. It's comes from a lifetime of learning one way, and again, just having these blinders on, and when they get stripped away from you, just it's like a blank canvas, and there's just it's overwhelming. So I think so we need to change our system and really, instead of teaching scales and what have you, not that we shouldn't be doing that, we should be doing that as well, but just putting improvising into the curriculum from the very beginning instead of introducing it as a add-on later.
I love when I have an orchestra and they'll say, we can't play by ear, give us the music. And I say, no, you can't play by ear. And they say, no, we can't. And I say, okay, everyone, pick up your instrument, well, no matter what it is, tuba, guitar, violin, cello, just play an A. Now let's all play Hey Jude. And they do it. And they can't believe they did it. Some of them never done it before. To actually play the music you already know, like Happy Birthday, all your favorite Christmas songs, your hymns from church. You already have a lifetime's worth of music in your head and heart, and you could play all of them on your instrument, and yet we don't for some reason.
I think another good suggestion is to, and I think it helps to think about sort of taking ownership, of your own decisions in what it is you're playing and what you're learning and what you're spending time on, rather than having a teacher tell you what repertoire you need to be focusing on. You need to take a step back and think about what it is that excites you musically. And if it's like a pop song on the radio, then go turn that on and in a practice room by yourself, no judgment, go play along with that recording. And it can be you just playing the melody, or it can be you improvising under it, or trying to find another, a second voice or whatever, but just to give yourself the freedom to get off the page and start with the learning by, doing it by ear thing. That, for some people, this is a really big leap. But there are so many great learning resources out there for online for free too, just for beginning with improvising. And I think just giving yourself permission is the first step. And I think we're almost out of time.
Yeah, we got the
should we
signal.
take
we
one
should-
more? It's time.
It's time. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I hope you guys will come back tomorrow. We're doing a master class, and and master class doesn't mean master class. It's a workshop. Bring your instruments at noon here, and we'll learn a tune, and we'll learn some idiomatic stuff and some chordal stuff.